This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Welcome to the podcast. My name is Kelly Vandever, and our guest today is Jacob Morgan. He is an author, speaker, and futurist who has worked with organizations such as Safeway, Cisco, SAP, Lowe's Home Improvement, Microsoft, and more. He's the author of two books, The Collaborative Organization, a strategic guide to solving your internal business challenges using emerging social and collaborative tools, and his most recent book is The Future of Work, Attract New Talent, Build Better Leaders, and Create a Competitive Organization. Jacob is the co-founder of the Future of Work community, which is a council of the world's most forward-thinking organizations focused on the future of work. Jacob hosts the popular podcast Future of Work, where he interviews business leaders, executives, and authors. Plus, twice a week, he publishes the Future in 5 video series on his Jacob Morgan YouTube channel. Jacob has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Inc. magazine, CNN, Fast Company, and writes a column for Forbes on the future of work. And of course, he blogs on his own website, thefutureorganization.com. Busy man, busy man.
It's a lot of stuff.
It is. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and so for the folks watching on video, we do have to start by explaining what we're seeing on the video.
The bridge, yeah, this is, I wish I had a cool story for this. I'm actually in the Amazon right now recording this, and it's windy here. I'm up on this bridge trying to hang on.
For the folks listening to the audio, he's standing in front of a large picture that's got a rope bridge behind it. It looks like he's on the edge of the rope bridge. It's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, it's from IKEA actually. I wish there was a cooler story behind it, that like I took it and rescued somebody while I was doing it, but it's just IKEA.
But it's still cool. It's still very cool.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so we'd like to start the podcast by asking a couple of quirky questions of our guest. So my first quirky question to you is, please tell us, what is your favorite guilty pleasure television show?
So there are a lot of shows that I enjoy watching, but I'd say guilty pleasure. I watch The Real Housewives of Atlanta with my wife.
You do not.
Yeah, I know. I hope nobody listens to this because that's very embarrassing. My wife got me into watching that with her. So that's kind of like our fun little show we watch together for the arguments and for Nene. I love Nene. So it's a fun, I guess, kind of a guilty pleasure show to just kind of relax and just hang out for a bit.
Well, I'm coming to you from the Atlanta area, so we're glad you are supporting the arts.
Exactly. Always try to support Atlanta.
Very cool. All right, and my second quirky question is, tell us something surprising about yourself that most people don't know.
Oh man, it's probably a couple things. That I was born in the former USSR in the Republic of Georgia, and that's where my parents immigrated from. And I was actually born in Melbourne, Australia. So I am not born in America, and my family is not from America.
Okay,
I'd say that'd be the thing.
So you are. I missed the USSR and Australia.
Yeah, so my parents are from the Republic of Georgia. They migrated to Italy where they met. Then they moved to Australia, which is where I was born. And then they moved to America, which is where I was raised. So we did a little, when I was a baby, even before I was born, my parents were already doing a little bit of traveling, moving around from country to country. But now I reside in the Bay Area. But family's originally from the Republic of Georgia.
Very cool. I did not know that. And is that part of what inspires your travel? So I know you travel to a lot of different places.
Yeah, I travel for a lot of speaking engagements and projects that I do. But I think because I was traveling at such a young age, I took my first cross-continental airplane ride at 2 months old. That maybe that has made it a little bit easier for me. Who knows? All
right. So people out there watching, if they have young children and they're taking them on planes, you
Get
might
them
be
on
setting
young.
All right. Very cool. All right. So now for a little more serious as we get into the content portion, I'm curious, what's your story? What happened in your life that got you to a place where you cared about the future of work and people being able to speak up in a work environment?
I just had bad jobs working for other people. So my first job out of college, well, I guess even before that, I was never a good student in high school. In high school, my GPA was a 2.79. Community college was a 2.8. Then I went to the University of California, Santa Cruz. I double majored in economics and psychology and graduated with honors with a 3.8 GPA. Got my first job out of college. And when I went to interview for this company, they told me how great the job was going to be. They told me all these fun projects I was going to be doing. So I was very jazzed and excited for my first job out of college. And a couple of months into the job, I'm doing PowerPoint, data entry, cold calling, and I'm miserable. And then one day, an executive comes out of his office and he hands me a $10 bill and says, "Go to Starbucks and get me a cup of coffee." And that was one of the last jobs I've ever had working for anybody else. And since then, I've been fascinated with this concept of the employee experience, of designing spaces, of engagement, of feedback, of trying to create workspaces and workplaces that are better and more meaningful. Because I think having those types of experiences, we shouldn't have that in organizations today. And so that just kind of fueled my curiosity and my interest in the future of work. And I had one other situation like that where when I moved to the Bay Area, I threw all my clothes in my car and drove up. And then the first job I had in the Bay Area was for a marketing agency. And at the time, I had a pass to go to the Web 2.0 Expo, which at the time was a huge conference.
Right.
And it was like a $2,500 ticket. And I won a pass to go. And I went to my boss at the time, and I said, "Look, I got this pass to go to the marketing conference. We're a marketing company. Why don't I go? I don't have any client deliverables. If something comes up, I can do it at night or on the weekends." And they wouldn't let me go. There was no reason behind it. It was just kind of, you can't go. So at that point, I realized I was kind of a slave to the company. I needed to get permission to even go outside. And so that was kind of the last straw for me. And ever since then, I've been on my own. So it's been, 8 years now, 9 years.
Very cool. Yeah. So a lot of people have that kind of a situation, but that doesn't necessarily inspire them to start their own kind of thing.
I was young, obviously, so early to mid 20s, and I just wanted to prove to myself that I could survive without having to work for somebody else. So I actually started writing articles online. I started doing whatever I could, just to looking for gigs on Craigslist. And I didn't start off in this space. I started off doing search engine optimization, social media consulting, just whatever I could, just to make enough money to pay rent and to prove to myself that I didn't need to work for somebody else to survive. And then it slowly grew and, slowly built on top of that. And eventually, got to where it is now, and hopefully will continue to grow and improve.
So how did you get to the point where you're like, you know what, I am a futurist? I like looking into to the great beyond and trying to figure out what's going on or what will be going on.
Yeah, that's, within the last few years, I started spending more time looking at trends and interviewing executives and asking about the future and visiting organizations and speaking with a lot of these leaders that are driving change at a global level. And so I'd say that I've spent much more time on trying to understand the future, specifically the future of work, within the past, I'd say between 5 years, 3 years, probably closer to 5 years now. So that's been a big focus of mine over the last probably half decade or so.
So as you were looking at different things related to the future of work, somehow the social tools, this social enterprise type tools came into play. How did you come across that, and then you eventually wrote the book. So tell me about that path.
Yeah, so that's it's a green book called The Collaborative Organization, and it's a 340-page strategy guide on how to deploy internal social networks and collaborative technologies successfully. So it's pretty comprehensive. It's a very strategic book. Probably not for the casual reader. It's not something that you would see at an airport and be like, "Oh, I have a 6-hour plane ride. Let me read this strategy guide." But I wrote that book and I got a lot of great feedback from a lot of people that contributed and provided insight and ideas and case studies to that book. But at the time, a lot of these collaborative technologies and internal social networks were becoming very, very popular. And there wasn't really a guide to help organizations understand how to make sense of this. Like, how do you actually make some of these things work? How do you roll them out? How do you prioritize features? How do you look at risks? How do you get employees to use these things? There were some articles and blogs written and stuff like that here and there, but there wasn't really anything that was put together as a solid framework, as a solid guide for how to make these things work. And so I saw an opportunity, and that's why I wrote that book.
And it's really well done. I love the way that you've constructed it
Thank
so
you.
that people can pick it up and follow it to implement what they need.
Thank you. Thank
Very
you.
cool. Yeah. Now, as you, the books was published in 2012, right?
Yes.
So what have you seen evolve in the last few years since publishing the book?
It's interesting. That's a question that comes up quite a bit. Since that book came out 4 years ago now, I don't think there have been tremendous changes. I mean, certainly these enterprise technologies and the internal social networks are becoming more widely adopted. I think we're starting to see more organizations use those things. But as a category, I think this idea of social business, of collaboration, is kind of dying off. I don't think it's, or it doesn't seem much anymore like it's its own industry, it's its own market space. I think it is becoming a part of something broader, which is what I like to think of as the future of work. And so I think the conversation has shifted a little bit. I think there's still a lot of emphasis on collaboration, on getting employees to use these technologies, but you don't see as much talk about social business. You don't see as much talk about all these vendors and articles and all that sort of stuff anymore. Because I think it's just becoming a part of something greater. And on the vendor side, I think that a lot of vendors, when these technologies first came out, it was all about innovation, new products, new features. Let's try to wow everybody. And I think on the vendor side, they've also slowed down a little bit to focus much more on sales and marketing. So they push out new releases here and there, new features here and there. But it almost feels like innovation has maybe slowed down a little bit for existing vendors, and that they are now in sales and marketing mode, which means that we're seeing some new vendors come into play, which hopefully will kind of, kickstart things a little bit. But overall, I think it's a fascinating space. A lot of great companies, a lot of great vendors in that space, creating really cool products. And I think it'll continue to evolve over the next few years.
Now, you talk in your book a lot about the different research and the companies that are adopting it and different stories related to that. Do you have any sense of what percentage, for example, of the Fortune 500 are actually using collaborative tools versus those that just haven't even got on board with them yet?
So I have yet to meet an organization that doesn't have some form of internal collaboration technology in place. I've never talked to an organization that says, we got nothing. We don't have any technologies in place for employees to communicate or collaborate. They always have something. It depends on, is it a new technology? Is it a legacy technology? Is it a video conferencing? Is it internal social networks? They always have something in place. So I'd say all of the Fortune 500 companies, at least that I am aware of or have spoken with, and probably not all 500, are doing something. In regards to what they are doing and what technologies they're using, and if they are modern technologies, that's a whole other question.
Right.
But I think every company out there has something, even if they don't know about it. So oftentimes, employees can just deploy these technologies on their own, and executives and IT professionals don't know about it. I've worked with a few organizations where that has certainly happened. So I think every large company out there has something, whether they know about it or not.
Right. I'm thinking back into my corporate days.
Yeah.
2006, I was managing a group of people, and we really needed a way for people to be able to collaborate. We had more work than we could handle, and we were trying to get other people up to speed. And so we were just hobbling things together to try to get people connected. So
these technologies are great. They do a lot of wonderful things. So
very cool. All right. So you've talked to a lot of senior managers. I've listened to your podcast, and but I'm wondering about the middle managers in some of these organizations that have tried to be more social, that are trying to get their employees to speak up. What do you see with the middle managers as far as comfort level with these ideas and technologies? Maybe they're a little bit older. Do they get are they fearful? Do they resent the fact that their employees can talk to their boss's boss? I mean,
Yeah.
what have you seen there?
I think it depends on the organization. There are definitely some organizations out there that are very much very hierarchical and their ways are ingrained. And I've heard plenty of stories where when an employee tries to talk to a boss's boss, they kind of get reprimanded for it, or the person directly above them gets upset and creates bad internal office politics, and it just becomes a mess. And then on the other side, I've seen other organizations where they are completely trying to destroy that idea, and they're saying, talk to anybody you want. We don't care. In fact, we encourage you to talk to your boss's boss. Talk to whoever you want, get support. And they really treat managers as coaches and as mentors and as people that are there to help open doors for employees. So I think it depends on the organization. Overall, I think we are going to see that type of a trend towards managers being more like coaches and mentors. It's definitely not there for all organizations yet. Change is never easy. We're social animals. We're social creatures. We're used to habits. We're used to doing things in a certain way. But I don't think it's so much older versus younger as it is just being able to change your behaviors and attitudes and values. I know a lot of people that are 40, 50, 60 years old that act more millennial than millennials do. They tweet, they blog, they're popular on their internal social networks. They're all over the place, and they get it. And some people struggle with that. So it's, I think we oftentimes need to understand why people struggle with it. Sometimes it's not because they are trying to be stubborn. It's not because they are trying to be difficult. It's not because they don't want to do it. They sometimes just don't understand how, or they don't understand why, or what the value is, or how it's going to impact the work that they're doing. So I think we need to approach it from that kind of an angle instead of like, oh, this person doesn't want to do it. Like, we got to fire them. They're just trying to be difficult. Because I don't find that to be the case. I mean, most people out there, from what I've found, don't want to not do something just for the sake of it. I mean,
Right.
they genuinely just are not sure, or they're scared, or they just need that help and guidance. And I think we can do much more of that within our companies.
Have you seen any examples of somebody that didn't get it, but then somehow the light went on and that kind of transformed?
I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head, but when I've interviewed a lot of these chief human resource officers, chief talent officers, I mean, they always tell me stories about things like that happening. And in fact, the CEO of Tangerine, which is formerly ING Direct Canada, he went through that kind of a situation. He was very stoic and static at work. He was kind of like this robot, this facade at work. And then one day, one of his mentors pulled him aside and said, look, I know a lot about your personal life, and I know that the way you're acting at work is not a reflection of who you really are. And you should be who you are at work and at home. You should be the same person. And so he changed, and he opened up a lot, and he became more transparent, and he became who he is at work. And employees were very thankful for that, because nobody wants to work with a robot. They want to work with a person. And so he became more open and transparent. He started using these technologies, and now the company's quite honestly kicking ass. So I think that's a good example.
Yeah. How there are a lot of leaders that are hesitant to be that open and transparent. I was listening to one of your older podcasts when you were interviewing the chief talent development person from LinkedIn, and she was
Pat Waters.
Right, she was telling.
Oh, she's great.
Telling the story about her son calling because he didn't.
Yep.
While she was doing a presentation in front of the board. So it's hard for managers to be vulnerable like that, but I always see it pays off. What has been your experience? How many of managers or executives are willing to be vulnerable like that, or do you see any trends?
Well, for me, it's always tough because a lot of the companies that I speak with are forward-thinking companies, so they're naturally inclined to do that. But I hear plenty of stories from other employees at other organizations that are the exact opposite. So it's hard for me to say how many or what the overall trend is. I know that, for example, a lot of the speaking engagements I get, a lot of the discussions I have at conferences and events, that topic always comes up. Vulnerability, being who you are at work, evolving management and leadership. I mean, that is always, always coming up. So I would like to think that it's something that we are going to see much more of in the future. But then you also have these executives, people like Pat Waters, people like Francine Katsoudas, the chief people officer of Cisco, people like Ellen Shook, the chief human resource officer at Accenture, and a lot of other people like that that are doing awesome things. And these are big global companies. Accenture's got hundreds of thousands of people. Cisco's got around 80,000 people. LinkedIn's got tens of thousands. So there are definitely some forward-thinking organizations, some great chief people and talent officers out there. Is it everywhere? No. I mean, is it every company? No. But I would like to think that that is the direction that we are moving towards.
Very cool. Very cool. So because you work with so many organizations that are forward thinking, what advice would you give to leaders and people in organizations that aren't quite so forward thinking, that maybe their leadership hasn't caught up to some of these trends for whatever reason? What kind of advice, what kind of what's the value that you see exhibited in these organizations that are more forward thinking, that you think that maybe other folks aren't getting, or don't understand what the value is, and so they're not making those kind of choices?
Well, I think the biggest piece of value, first is it's about creating an environment where people want to show up, not assuming that they need to show up. I think when you create an environment that people want to show up, they bring in their best ideas, they bring in their hopes, their dreams, their fears. I mean, they bring in everything with them to work, and they actually want to be a part of the organization. They want to be there. They want to contribute. They want to build something bigger than themselves. And a lot of research has been done by Glassdoor, which has been verified by a couple academic institutions, which show that companies that are ranked as best places to work, as great places to work, outperform those that aren't on the S&P 500. So there is clearly some financial value. Engaged and happy employees are also, they also help create happy and engaged customers. So it almost seems like it's silly for us to think about, well, what's the value of creating a forward-thinking, engaged organization? Well, I mean, don't do it. So it's kind of, it's sort of like, well, do you need water? Prove to me that you need water. Well, it's like, if I don't have water, I'm going to die. I don't know how to quantify that for you. I got to have water. And so I feel like a lot of these things that we talk about around the future of work are similar. They are like water to the organization. If you don't provide that to the employees will not want to work there. They will not want to show up. They will go work for competitors. They will create horrible, toxic internal office environments, and the company will die. I think that's a very simple way to look at it. But as far as what to do, there are a lot of things organizations can do. So first is educate yourself. I have around 70 podcasts now with top executives around the world. Just listen to what these other executives are doing. Listen to what they're thinking about, what their challenges are. Just hear what is going on in their mind. That's it. It's very, very simple. Second thing you can do is start somewhere. So take a concept at work that you feel is a little outdated or archaic, regardless of what it is, and fix it. It could be the annual review process. It could be some sort of an accounting process. It could be some sort of a legal procedure. It could be commuting to and from the office. Take something and say, all right, this hasn't been changed in the last 50, 60, 80, 100 years. Clearly, this is something that employees want. Why don't we try and test and figure out if there's a way that we can improve this? And it's part of what I like to think of the employee experience design loop. Employees give feedback. The organization turns that feedback into insight. They design some kind of an experience. Employees go through it, and you kind of get this infinity loop of feedback and design going back and forth. But start small. I mean, think of your organization like a laboratory and less like a factory. just start to run experiments, and things will start to happen.
And I think people are scared to do that. Sometimes they're
Yeah.
afraid of the failure. But you keep hearing people say more and more, fail fast, and
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a corporate culture and just an overall culture where failure is not good. I mean, who wants to fail, right? It's always funny when you hear this, fail fast. And there's a difference between encouraging failure and embracing failure, right? So I think sometimes people mix up the two. This isn't about encouraging failure, right? Encouraging failure means like, okay, you're going to go run a race and you're competing against 10 other people. Don't sleep the night before, get drunk and run barefoot, right? That's encouraging failure. Embracing failure is this idea of, okay, you're going to go run a race tomorrow. Try as hard as you can. If you don't win, that is okay. We will figure out what you need to do to improve. We'll work on it. You'll have another race in a couple of weeks, right? That is the difference between encouraging failure and embracing failure. So this concept of fail fast is sometimes taken out of context. So it's not about, fail and do it quickly. It's about, if you do fail, get over it quickly and learn from whatever happened to cause you to fail and move on. Like, move on quickly. But don't fail quickly. So it's not like fail fast. It's move on from failure fast. And so I think that we need to have this idea of experimentation, of testing more within our organizations. And, it's not easy. We're not taught that in schools.
Right.
If you fail a test in school, your professor's not going to say, all right, well, you failed and, you'll do well on the next one. I mean, that's 50% of your grade. When I was in UC Santa Cruz, you had like 2 exams per class. Each exam was worth 40% of your grade. You fail one of those exams, like, that's it. You're getting a D in the class. And so when you go from that type of environment into an organization that says fail fast, there's a big mismatch. Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of forward-thinking progressive organizations are starting to understand this concept and encouraging it. And so I hope we will see much more of that in the future.
Very cool.
I'm very hopeful. I'm an optimist. In some ways.
Okay, and what ways are you not then an optimist?
Well, there's always a big debate around robots and jobs and technology and what's going to happen there. So that's, at the end of the day, nobody knows what's going to happen. But sometimes it's just very hard to imagine that when you look at driverless cars, for example, that's going to replace hundreds of thousands of jobs just in the United States, if not millions, and many, many millions of jobs around the world, that all of a sudden all of those new jobs are going to be replaced. But at the same time, I see the flip side of that, where I see that we have online educational institutions, we have open courses, we have things like YouTube where people might be able to retrain themselves quickly. So I try to, instead of taking sides on one side or the other for certain debates, I try to understand both perspectives and just share what both those perspectives are and let other people make up their mind. But it's those types of things are debates where it's 50-50. Half the people think that technology will replace jobs, more jobs than it creates, and half people think that the opposite is true, that we're gonna be screwed. So some people see more jobs, some people see less jobs. I like to see both sides of it and say, look, here's the information, try to decide yourself. But things like that I just personally struggle with sometimes, which side do I kind of lean on. But I try to be optimistic when I can.
Well, and do you feel like things have changed in the years since you had those first couple of corporate jobs where they left such a horrible taste in your mouth? Are you seeing more people get into more environments being created where that's not the case?
Yeah, I mean, I also live in the Bay Area, so it's a little bit of an anomaly here. But I've also toured and visited offices all over the world. From India, from Argentina to Australia. So I've been to a lot of different companies and offices all over the world. And I think there is an overall trend towards redesigning spaces and towards thinking about what I like to think of as the employee experience. So I do think that there is more of a shift towards that. Health and wellness, well-being, engagement. I definitely think that we are moving our organizations towards having non-Jacob-like experiences that I had when I was graduating college. But yeah, there's still, those things still do exist. They're still everywhere. Those are still probably the standard of what most people would experience, but hopefully it'll change.
Right, right. Do you think some of that's being influenced by the millennial generation?
Absolutely. In my book, I talk about 5 trends that are shaping the future of work, and millennials and changing demographics are definitely one of them. But I always tell organizations, if you were to fire all of your millennials, you would still have a lot of people that care about doing meaningful work and workplace flexibility and good compensation and good relationships and purpose and meaning. Like, these aren't just millennial attributes.
Right.
But we have to acknowledge that there are some differences. Millennials do want to move up faster. Millennials do want feedback on a more regular basis. But there's also a lot of similarities. But I think the fact that so many organizations want to attract and retain these millennials and this top talent means that they need to cater to ways that are modern. There's a little cartoon that I always put up in a lot of my keynotes that says, our biggest challenge is the time zone difference. In New York, it's 2:45, and in our headquarters, it's 1974. And that's how most organizations operate. We live in 2016, and we operate in 1976. We literally go back in time when we show up to work. And I think we have to close that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool, very cool. So in one of your posts, you answered the question, should organizations adopt tools first, or should they change their culture first? And would you mind answering that question here in this forum for the folks that haven't seen your answer online?
Sure. The debate, I guess, for people that don't have context around it is, when you're trying to drive change, you obviously have kind of 2 paths you can take. Do you invest in modern tools and technologies for employees to use, or do you focus on driving change through corporate culture first? And it's kind of a trick question because you can't do either one first. You have to focus on both. It's great to try to change behavior first, but without giving employees the tools that they need to change behavior, it's very hard to do that. Collaboration is a great example. If you have a global company and you tell everybody to collaborate more, how do you collaborate at scale with tens of thousands of employees without the technology in place? You can't do it. And the exact opposite is true, is if you focus just on the technology and say, oh, great, we have all these wonderful new tools for you to use to become more collaborative, then employees say, why? What's in it for me? Our culture here is not very collaborative or communicative. Why would I use these tools? And so again, same problem you run into there. People aren't going to get it. They're not going to participate. So there definitely needs to be an investment in both areas. Give employees the right tools and technologies they need to get their jobs done, but also focus on educating them and understanding why this actually needs to happen. So it's a 2-prong approach, doing both at the same time.
All right. I just thought that was an excellent way to look at that, and I was hoping you would share that. Thank you. Okay. So what have been maybe 1 or 2 pleasant surprises that you've come across in your work? Maybe things you weren't expecting to find, but have been pleasantly surprised to find more and more.
You mean like examples, or just stories, or just anything?
Anything. Stories are always great. Examples are always great.
Well, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that this concept of employee experience was as popular as it was. When I started writing about this and doing a lot of work and research on this over the past few years, I didn't know that so many organizations were thinking along the same lines. And so I was very pleasantly surprised to hear that there are companies out there like Airbnb, like Cisco, that actually have functions designed to focus on employee experience. Pandora is another one. And so I was very pleasantly surprised to hear and to see that these organizations actually have job titles, actually have teams and functions specifically designed to focus on employee experience. I thought that was really, really cool and really great to see. I'm also pleasantly surprised by some organizations and just how forward-thinking they really are and how fast they're trying to drive change. I mean, Ellen Shook at Accenture is implementing a new talent performance review process for hundreds of thousands of people within 11 months, which is amazing considering that most organizations take several years to do that for even half the size of a company. So I am always pleasantly surprised when I speak with these leaders to get their perspectives on how the workplace is changing and what they're actually doing. Because some companies out there, quite honestly, are just doing awesome stuff. They're thinking about very cool things, and they are gracious enough to share with me. That's another thing. I'm always pleasantly surprised by how open a lot of these chief executives are in the podcast and conversations at events, and I always appreciate that. And same thing with members of our Future of Work community. You know, seeing how open and transparent these organizations are and how much they're willing to share is fantastic.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Jacob, are there some other thoughts, anything about the future of work that we haven't touched on, but that you think we need to be paying attention to?
Oh man. You know, I think, and Gary Hamel has said this quite a bit, this concept of challenge convention, and I definitely want to echo that. I think that the future of work is all about challenging convention. It's, you know, think differently, challenge the status quo. Don't assume that everything that we have been doing and the ways that we've been working over the past many, many decades is the right way, is the most effective way, is the most efficient way, and is the way that people want to work. So I'd say that the last kind of closing words, or the last words of wisdom, so to speak, would be start somewhere and do action, but challenge convention and think of your company like a lab.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jacob. So
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Take care.
Thanks.
This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.